A cracked bone once answered a king more loudly than a council of ministers, and that startling truth opens our journey. What kind of world lets a scorching line on ox shoulder or turtle shell decide war and marriage? The urge to see tomorrow has never been a fringe habit. It has been a public technology of power. Rulers consulted it, farmers trusted it, travelers timed their departures by it, and priests guarded it. One question follows immediately. If so many civilizations built systems to read the future, what did they believe the future was? Step closer and notice how varied these systems look. Some read the sky and counted eclipses as warnings. Some listened to the whisper of sacred groves and the rustle of leaves. Others trained priestly experts who memorized thousands of omens carved into clay. The spectrum runs from cool observation to ecstatic trance, yet the underlying promise remains constant. Tomorrow can be glimpsed and shaped. This story moves far beyond one famous French seer. Long before a Renaissance apothecary turned astrologer wrote verses in Provence, cultures from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica built libraries of fate. They did not seek entertainment. They sought survival, legitimacy, and moral clarity. The results were often decisive in the fiercest moments of statecraft. The stakes were nothing less than life and dynasty. Think of prophecy as a language that each civilization learned to speak in its own accent. Babylon translated the heavens into rules for kings. Egypt taught dreams to speak the grammar of signs. Israel tied prediction to ethics and justice. Greece made ambiguity into a mirror that forced hard choices. China turned change itself into a manual for wise governance. Each conversation about tomorrow also revealed what a people valued today. You will hear questions along the way that sharpen attention. Where did authority come from for these predictions? Why did certain methods endure for centuries while others faded? How did texts and rituals move from temple to court, from court to village, and from village back to empire? The answers will not only chart who predicted the future before Nostradamus, they will illuminate the human habit of making meaning out of risk, chance, and hope. Before we continue, make sure to smash both the like and hype buttons and subscribe to our channel for more ominous history videos. We greatly appreciate your support. 1600 BC Mesopotamian omen science. Imagine a royal night in Babylon when the sky darkens at noon and a court of scholars rushes to their shelves of clay. Why did a shadow across the sun speak in a voice of warning to kings? In Mesopotamia, omen science was a state archive and a craft. The great series known as Enuma Anu and Lil collected thousands of entries that tied celestial events to earthly outcomes. An eclipse did not merely impress, it triggered procedures, substitutes, and vows. The art extended beneath the skin of sacrificial animals, where priests read the meaning of bumps and furrows. Liver models made of clay show carefully labeled features, each a doorway to an interpretation. How could a curve on a liver guide the drafting of a treaty? The logic was cumulative. Over generations, scholars recorded which signs preceded famine, victory, or rebellion. Memory became a tool for ruling. Every sign came with action. If the moon vanished on a given day, the king might step aside temporarily, seating a substitute to absorb the blow of fate. Does that sound like theater? It was an insurance policy written in ritual language. The expectation was not passive. The expectation was that knowledge could deflect danger, or at least prepare the court to meet it. Calendars and canals also lived under the gaze of omens. When to begin planting, when to summon labor, and when to send messengers to distant governors could all be timed by the favorable word of the heavens. The farmers who obeyed these patterns believed they were cooperating with a living order. The scholars who maintained the lists believed they were preserving the memory of cause and effect on a cosmic scale. The legacy of this system is not only a pile of tablets, it is a habit of linking observation to governance. Mesopotamian omen science fused record-keeping with metaphysics, and the result was a tactical way of seeing. If the stars could whisper warnings, a wise king would listen, adjust, and live to reign another year. That sober confidence shaped policy as surely as any army. 700 BC Assyrian court prophets. Now travel north to the palaces of Assyria, where the king receives letters that blend fierce poetry with direct counsel. How did these oracles differ from the technical lists of Babylon? In Nineveh and other centers, prophets spoke in the name of deities with urgent assurance. Messages could confirm a campaign, warn of treachery, or promise victory if sacred tasks were completed. A living voice cut through doubt. Archaeology preserves tablets from Mari and the Neo-Assyrian world that carry the weight of these messages. Picture a courier arriving at night with a prophecy for the king in the field. What is the value of a promise when troops are cold and river crossings are risky? The value lies in uniting command with confidence. When the god speaks through a prophet, the army hears a narrative that justifies sacrifice and endurance. Court prophets did not operate in a vacuum. They worked alongside diviners who read entrails and alongside astrologers who tracked the skies. Is that a contradiction? It is a portfolio strategy. If many independent channels point to a shared conclusion, the king can act with fewer regrets. Redundancy of signs stabilized decisions in a brutal geopolitical environment. Critics existed, and the texts sometimes preserve debates over authenticity. Who guards the guardians of revelation? Protocols emerged to test prophets by their track records and to require public performance of rituals. The court understood that a false voice could waste treasure and men. The result was careful choreography that bound charisma to bureaucracy. The Assyrian habit of consulting living oracles while also maintaining technical divination created a balanced model of prophetic governance. Inspiration and data walked together into the throne room. When victory followed, inscriptions credited both the god and the procedures. When defeat came, reforms of ritual followed. Even setbacks became evidence that the system should be tuned, not discarded. 1100 BC, Oracles of Ammon and Dream Manuals. Egypt adds a different register where dreams and oracles walked among the people in crowded festival processions. How can a god carried on the shoulders of priests answer a personal petition? At the oasis of Siwa and in temples of Ammon across the land, worshippers asked questions as the divine bark swayed. A nod left or right could signify yes or no. The crowd watched the answer together. Dream books in Egypt offered another doorway into the future. Imagine a traveler lodging for the night in a temple, recording a dream at dawn, and consulting a manual that mapped images to outcomes. If a crocodile appears, does it promise profit or peril? The manuals taught readers to decode. They also taught practical wisdom about timing, partnership, and risk. Oracles did political work as well. Foreign rulers from afar sought recognition from the god at Siwa. Why would a conqueror detour through the desert for a word from an Egyptian deity? Legitimacy is a treasure that cannot be minted in silver alone. The god confirmed titles, and the story of that confirmation spread faster than coin. This popular openness created a bridge between court and village. Petitioners approached with lawsuits and disputes, and the oracle settled matters that written law could not soothe. What happens when justice is seen and heard in front of neighbors? Trust grows, even if fear stands close by. The result was a social fabric that folded divine response into daily life. Egyptian divination teaches a subtle lesson. Prophecy is not only about apocalyptic finales, it is also about near futures that shape ordinary hopes. When a boat turns slightly to nod at a question, a life may change course. That is the gentle power of a system that lets the divine speak in public under the open sky. 730 BC, the Hebrew prophets raised a standard that joined prediction to conscience with unforgettable force. Why does a warning about invasion come packaged with a demand for justice to the poor? In the messages of Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, the future is moral terrain. If a people violates covenantal obligations, the forecast is not random. It is consequence given voice. These prophets addressed kings and markets as much as temples. What happens to a society that bribes judges and neglects widows? The answer arrives as both social analysis and divine charge. Empires rise on the horizon. Alliances promise safety. Yet the prophetic voice insists that character is policy. The ground truth of righteousness decides outcomes more than cavalry counts. Their rhetoric is artful and fierce. Metaphor carries weight because it allows listeners to test themselves. Are we the vineyard that failed to yield fruit? Are we the city that polished the outside while rotting within? These questions pull the future back into present choices, which is exactly the point. Forecasting becomes a call to reform rather than a map to inevitability. The prophets did not reject signs or dreams. They placed them in a hierarchy where ethical fidelity sits higher than technique. What does this do to the culture of divination? It purifies it. Predictions that flatter power without confronting injustice are exposed as empty. A true word confronts, heals, and redirects. That is a demanding standard for any age. The enduring influence of the Hebrew prophets rests on this fusion of time and truth. They made tomorrow a mirror for today. They insisted that a nation's fate is woven from its treatment of the weak and its loyalty to the sacred. In that vision, prophecy becomes the conscience of history rather than a puzzle of codes. 165 BC Jewish apocalyptic streams. When oppression tightens and courts fall silent, apocalyptic imagination often blooms with urgent color. Why do cryptic visions multiply when empires thunder? Texts connected with Daniel, strands of Enochic literature, and writings from the communities near the Dead Sea share a bold claim. History moves under a hidden timetable that will be revealed at the right hour. Numbers and beasts, weeks of years and heavenly books, these recur for a reason. If calendars can be sanctified, then tyranny has an expiration date. What does a coded timetable offer to a fearful community? It offers endurance. It says the Most High has not lost the plot. Patience becomes strategy anchored in a promise of reversal. Angels walk into these narratives as interpreters and judges. Why add heavenly guides to the stage? Because the scale of injustice looks bigger than human solutions. When angelic figures teach seers to read what they see, the audience learns how to interpret their own days. Life becomes classroom and courtroom at once. Communities copied these texts, argued about them, and used them to measure leaders. What kind of person fits the profile of the arrogant horn that must fall? How should the faithful handle collaboration with a foreign power? The answers vary by group, but the current is consistent. Fidelity now brings clarity later, and the end will be a setting right of scales. These writings forged a durable template for resistance through hope. They taught that history has a structure, that empires are not eternal, and that suffering can carry meaning without being excused. A countdown that no tyrant can reset becomes a quiet anthem for communities under pressure, and that song never fully fades. 95 AD, the Book of Revelation. On a rocky island under imperial pressure, a visionary writes a letter that sounds like thunder and sings like a psalm. Why does Revelation surround the reader with lamps and trumpets, dragons and cities of light? The book stages a courtroom for the cosmos where competing sovereignties make their claims. The symbols are not riddles for their own sake. They are banners for allegiance. Audience matters. The early churches who first heard the message lived under suspicion, temptation, and fatigue. What can strengthen fragile communities more than abstract advice? A tour of heaven where martyr souls are honored and a future city shines with justice. Does that work? Hope is painted in images that ordinary believers can memorize and carry to market. The text also practices critique without naming emperors directly. Why choose symbol over slogan? Symbols travel better. They protect messengers and outlast regimes. A beast with many heads and a city that intoxicates with trade are portraits that fit more than one era. That flexibility keeps the book alive in many storms. Revelation does not abandon Earth for escape. It ends with a city descending, not the faithful ascending away from the world. What future is that? It is a vision of healed community where light needs no temple because presence fills every street. Economics, ecology, and worship meet in a single picture of well-being. For all its grandeur, the book remains a pastoral letter. It asks congregations to endure, repent, and love with steady hearts. It calls leaders to courage and refuses to flatter the powerful. By holding together warning and consolation, it offers a prophetic map that guides believers through contested time toward promised peace. 500 BC Zoroastrian eschatology. Across the Iranian plateau, an old tradition looks at the end not as annihilation but as cleansing. Why would a faith imagine a river of molten metal that purifies creation instead of destroying it? Zoroastrian teaching about the final renewal, called Pachacamac, rests on a moral universe in which truth and falsehood struggle in history until truth wins. The outcome is not in doubt. The path there tests every choice. This worldview assigns weight to daily deeds because each act leans the world toward order or toward the lie. How does that shape ideas of prediction? It reframes them. Eschatology becomes a promise that personal integrity matters in a cosmic drama. The future is a goal drawing the present forward rather than a trap waiting to spring. A figure known as the Saoshyant emerges as a restorer at the end of the great struggle. Why is a restorer needed if truth is destined to win? The answer blends mercy and justice. The restorer embodies the triumph of good and gathers the faithful into renewal. Expectation of such a leader shaped community prayers and gave language for hope when empires loomed. Time is often pictured in long epochs within this tradition. What happens when people think in epochs rather than mere decades? They build resilience. Rituals of purity, care for fire, and honesty in trade are not small acts. They are stones in the construction of a renewed world. Every conscience becomes a workshop for the end of days. Zoroastrian eschatology offered a future that dignified effort while anchoring courage. It taught that the last word belongs to restoration, that judgment is medicinal for the faithful, and that deceit devours itself. That combination of ethical clarity and promised renewal influenced neighbors and left a bright line across the history of ideas. 500 BC, the Oracle of Delphi. At the slopes of Parnassus, a woman seated above a chasm spoke words that shaped wars and colonies. How can a trance in a small sanctuary move the plans of entire city-states? The Oracle of Delphi answered questions with a music that demanded careful listening. Answers were often brief and shimmering with double meanings. That ambiguity was not a flaw, it was a mirror. City delegations arrived with rich gifts and carefully framed questions. Why frame the question with such care? Because the phrasing could steer the horizon of the answer. A general might ask whether he should cross a river, not whether he would prevail. The reply could be true either way, yet wisdom was required to act. The oracle trained leaders to think. The process itself carried drama. The Pythia prepared with ritual purity, consulted the god, and delivered words that priests arranged into verse. Was there theatrical skill involved? There was ceremony, but the power lay in the credibility of a long record that communities respected. When a prophecy later seemed fulfilled, memory added strength to the shrine. Colonization decisions traveled through Delphi as well. Why link new city foundations to a sanctuary far away? A shared sacred approval created legitimacy and cohesion for settlers who would face hardship. The distant voice became a bond that tied scattered Greeks to a center of guidance and identity. Delphi's oracle worked because it matched human complexity. It did not remove responsibility, it heightened it. By speaking in images and riddles, the oracle forced leaders to own their choices. The future did not crush them. It challenged them to read their moment with courage and humility. 600 BC, Dodona and other Greek oracles. Beyond Delphi, Greece listened to oak leaves and cast lots at shrines that healed and advised. Why would a whispering tree draw pilgrims across mountains? At Dodona, the rustle of the sacred oak was read as speech, and simple questions met simple answers that still carried weight. The oldest sanctuaries often rely on the plainness of nature as voice. Regional oracles thrived because local communities needed counsel close at hand. What does a farmer ask of a god? He asks about marriage, travel, debt, and planting. Priests received tablets with questions, then returned brief responses that could settle a household debate or a village quarrel. The divine word traveled home in a pocket. Healing sanctuaries added another dimension where dreams and cures intertwined. Why tie medicine to prophecy? Because uncertainty about illness belongs to the same family as uncertainty about war. In places where the god of healing was honored, sleepers sought dreams that prescribed treatments, and inscriptions recorded success stories that encouraged others to try. Lot casting offered a democratic feel to guidance. How can chance speak for heaven? The Greeks often believed that the divine arranged outcomes as a sign. Drawing a marked token or observing bird flight gave a quick decision when time was short and passions were high. The method disciplined communities by ending disputes cleanly. The landscape of Greek oracles shows a culture that spread decision-making across sacred places rather than centralizing everything in one shrine. People learned to interpret, to weigh, and to accept answers. The future became a shared conversation where gods, priests, and petitioners all had roles, and that conversation helped cities cohere through pressure and change. 650 BC, the Sibyls and the Sibylline Books. Voices called Sibyls appeared in stories around the Mediterranean as women who spoke for gods with fierce clarity. Why did Rome gather their sayings into guarded books? In a city that prided itself on law and discipline, the sudden authority of a seeress could be destabilizing unless managed. The state purchased the oracles and stored them under lock to be consulted only in crisis. Consultation happened after portents shook nerves. What would count as a portent for a Roman Senate? A statue might weep, lightning might strike a temple, or a flock might act strangely. The Sibylline books were opened then, and a prescription emerged. Perhaps a new ritual was needed, or a foreign cult should be welcomed to soothe divine anger. Ceremony became policy. The Sibyl also appeared in literature as a guide to underworld journeys and a herald of ages. Why did poets love her voice? It allowed them to blend myth, politics, and hope in a form that sounded older than history. When an empire sought a sense of destiny, a Sibyl could lend language that felt anchored beyond the reach of any single ruler. Debate about authenticity followed the books across the centuries. Who decides which oracles are genuine? Rome tried to fix the problem with control and indexing, yet the aura of the Sibyl kept escaping the archive. That tension between living voice and stored text shadowed the city's spiritual life through triumphs and disasters. The legacy of the Sibylline tradition is double. It gave the state a safety valve and a manual for managing fear, and it kept alive the possibility that a single inspired sentence can change public direction. In that possibility, a people finds both comfort and risk, which is exactly what prophecy promises. 550 BC, Roman augurs and haruspices. Rome also trusted watchers of birds and readers of entrails who made public life legible. Why require augury before assemblies or battles? The belief was simple and stern. The gods had a stake in civic order, and their signs should confirm or veto major acts. An unfavorable omen could delay a vote or cancel a march, saving face while preventing disaster. Haruspices, often linked to Etruscan wisdom, inspected the livers of sacrificial animals for marks that spelled favor or anger. How could such details carry so much authority? The answer lies in training and tradition. Experts studied models that labeled every ridge and hollow, then compared what they saw to a long memory of outcomes. A shared technical language created trust. These practices did not remove politics from decision-making. How can an omen be both sacred and strategic? Magistrates sometimes timed ceremonies to catch helpful signs, and opponents accused one another of manipulating interpretations. Yet the shared rules limited chaos. Ritual framed conflict, and appeals to the heavens offered compromise without humiliation. Ordinary citizens watched these rites with pride and suspicion in alternating seasons. What did they gain from the spectacle? They gained a sense that the city did not act alone. Even skeptics could welcome a pause forced by a negative sign when tempers ran hot. Ceremony cooled the blood of a hot day and allowed a better plan to form overnight. Roman divination shows how a republic and then an empire integrated prophecy into law, war, and daily rhythm. By placing omens at the threshold of action, Rome learned to interrogate its own confidence. That habit did not guarantee wisdom, but it often slowed folly. Slowing folly is one of the secret gifts of any prophetic tradition. 450 BC, Greco Roman astrology and the birth of personal fate. From the same world that watched birds came a mathematical art that mapped the hour of birth to the dance of planets. Why would a general who scoffed at oracles still pay for an astrologer to cast his nativity? Astrology promised a chart of tendencies and timing, a weather report for character and opportunity. It translated the heavens into personal counsel. The craft drew on Mesopotamian observation and Greek geometry, later codified in influential treatises that set rules for aspects and dignities. How did tables and angles become a trusted voice? The answer is beauty and repeatability. A chart could be calculated again by another expert and yield the same positions, inviting debate over meaning rather than over facts. Astrology moved into courts and markets, advising on marriages, journeys, and military ventures. What do people want from such counsel? They want rhythm. They want to know when to push and when to wait. Electional techniques taught seekers to choose hours that harmonized with their aims, and stories of success fueled demand. The art sparked controversy because it seemed to challenge civic authority. If fate rules, what room remains for virtue? Thoughtful astrologers answered that the stars incline rather than compel, framing choice rather than erasing it. That compromise let the art spread without declaring war on ethics. The balance kept astrology near the center of cultural life. As astrology matured, it taught people to imagine life as a patterned journey rather than a random walk. That imagination brought comfort when events ran rough. It brought humility when pride surged. Above all, it stitched the sky and the street together so that a person could look up at night and feel oriented rather than lost. 400 AD Greco Roman dream interpretation and the handbook tradition. Even in a world of charts and omens, private dreams held a secret theater where the future whispered in symbols. Why would a merchant or a midwife keep a copy of a dream manual near the bed? Because dreams were common to every status, and a simple key offered guidance at low cost. The famous handbook tradition explained images with brisk practicality so anyone could try it. Dreams served both therapy and prediction. How can one vision soothe and warn at the same time? A dream that exposes hidden fear can prevent foolish risks tomorrow. A dream that mirrors a blind spot can rescue a friendship before careless words break it. Prediction here feels like recognition. The book does not force fate. It helps readers hear themselves. Critics argued that dreams are too slippery to rule by, and they are right about public policy. Yet, at the level of household and personal enterprise, the tradition spread because it offered a sense of participation in the reading of destiny. Why should only priests and scholars interpret signs? The Dream Manual democratized a corner of divination. The literary culture around dreams created an archive of anecdotes that traveled with charm. Can a single striking example persuade a reader to trust a method? One story of a dream that saved a voyage lodges in memory and encourages imitation. Memory creates markets, and markets sustain genres. The dream book became a companion as familiar as a calendar. In the end, this tradition kept alive a basic conviction that the mind receives messages at night worth examining by day. That conviction bridged the gap between sacred and ordinary life. It still does. When a person wakes with a vivid scene and a racing pulse, a page of old interpretations offers company while the coffee brews and choices line up. 200 BC Celtic and insular seer traditions. On the Atlantic rim, bards and counselors stood beside kings and warned them of vows and taboos called gyasa. Why did rulers in early Irish tales fear prophetic poetry? Because a single stanza could bind honor and fate in front of a court that valued reputation more than coin. The seer did not merely describe tomorrow. The seer shaped it by naming the rules of a life. The figure of the visionary woman also appears, a traveler between worlds whose counsel could change a campaign. What happens when prophecy speaks in the middle of a feast? Decisions harden quickly when pride and song combine. These stories remind us that prediction in such societies was woven into entertainment, law, and ritual. No separate stage existed. Even the natural world joined the chorus. Birds and rivers signaled, and heroes collected omens on the road. How does a culture maintain coherence with such a scatter of signs? The answer is narrative. Epics tied portents to patterns so audiences could learn by repetition. Children grew up hearing what a raven means and did not forget in adulthood. As Christianity spread, seer traditions adapted, sometimes retreating into poetry and sometimes converging with saintly insight. Does a change in religion erase older ways? More often it repurposes them. The gift of foretelling moved into new stories that warned and encouraged under fresh banners of faith, keeping memory alive within new forms. Celtic and insular prophecy proves that the spoken word can carry as much authority as any written oracle. A voice with rhythm fixes itself in a listener more deeply than a dry decree. That is why kings feared bards and why communities cherished them. The future, sung aloud, becomes a burden and a guide that no one can easily set down. 900 AD Norse volur and voluspa. In the far north, a seeress stepped into a ring of listening warriors and spoke of worlds born and worlds ending, and the hall fell quiet. Why did audiences trust a traveling woman who carried a staff and the memory of songs? The answer lives in the Norse belief that fate is woven like cloth and that some people can touch the thread. A vulva claimed that touch and shaped counsel that settled quarrels and set voyages in motion. The poem, called Voluspa, preserves a grand vision that stretches from the first spark over the ice to the last fire at the end of days. What kind of prophecy narrates the birth of gods and the death of giants as if it were tomorrow's weather? A mythic timeline trains minds to think in cycles. When people expect cycles, courage in hardship grows because winter is not forever and harvests return. Seder, the practice linked to the volur, used song and trance to seek hidden knowledge. How can chant become a tool for navigating risk? Rhythm steadies breath, attention narrows, and memory rises with images that listeners learn to test against experience. A village that hears the same chants over seasons learns what to do when a sign repeats itself in the sky or on the sea. Leaders consulted these women not only for battle, but for the delicate management of oaths. What happens to a house when a broken vow goes unhealed? The seeress offered paths to repair through ritual and restraint, saving alliances that might otherwise shatter. Prophecy in this world acted like a brace for timber that would crack without pressure in the right place. Voluspa closes with a world renewed after the roar of Ragnarok, and that ending matters. Why does a culture famous for hard storms hold a quiet picture of green fields beyond the ashes? Because people live better when they believe that endings open doors. The vulva's voice carried that conviction as a gift that outlived the mead and the embers. 100 AD Germanic lot casting in runes. Across the forest, described by Roman writers, chiefs drew lots before assemblies to ask which path would bring honor. How can a handful of marked twigs decide a treaty? Communities believed that the divine arranged outcomes when humans surrendered control for a moment. The surrender created acceptance, and acceptance curbed feuds that could bleed a tribe dry. Lot casting offered speed when storms gathered. Why choose chance before battle? A quick sign focuses scattered wills, and even dissenters follow the token that falls from a bowl. In a world where hesitation kills, rapid unity is a form of safety that no speech can equal. The lot made unity feel sacred rather than merely pragmatic. In later centuries, runes carried oracular uses as people carved short questions and answers into wood or bone. What turns an alphabet into a doorway for counsel? Letters gain gravity when each shape carries a name and a story. When a reader draws a single rune and remembers its tale of wealth or need or protection, the memory becomes guidance wrapped in a symbol. Seers who practiced this art did not claim to erase risk. How does a sign help if danger remains? It helps by narrowing choices and by supplying confidence that steady hands require. A hunter who trusts the draw steps more lightly in the dark and returns with meat because boldness can be the difference between success and injury. The deeper lesson from these customs is communal rather than private. The act of drawing lots taught whole gatherings to accept outcomes without endless dispute. That habit preserved strength for real enemies and left a trace of reverence over hard decisions, which is often the only shield a small people possesses. 1200 BC Chinese oracle bones of the Shang. In royal courts of the late 2nd millennium before Christ, turtle shells and ox scapulae cracked under red heat, while scribes bent close to read destiny. Why record a question about rain or war on bone? The permanence of bone preserved a record of inquiry that became a library of state. The questions ranged from harvest planning to childbirth, and the answers came in fissures mapped like rivers. The method was disciplined. A diviner drilled pits, applied heat, watched the pattern of cracks, and inscribed both the query and the verdict. How can cracks bear authority? Authority grows from repetition and from the sober linking of sign and outcome over time. A rain that tracks, answers year after year, learns which signs carry weight and which are noise. These inscriptions reveal a society that tied ancestors to government in a vivid way. Why ask the dead to bless a hunt? Because continued prosperity proved that familial and cosmic relations were in order. When kingship depends on harmony with forebears, divination becomes both devotion and audit. A failed harvest challenges legitimacy, a successful one confirms it. Military campaigns marched under the Council of the Bones. What difference can a sign make to a general? Marching with endorsed timing rallies troops and keeps supply carts rolling with fewer doubts. Soldiers who believe that heaven approves do not panic at the first rumor of ambush. Confidence travels faster than fear when it has a sacred stamp. The oracle bones also carried the seed of Chinese writing forward. How does a script born on bone influence the next 3,000 years? The script standardized memory so that later thinkers could quote old questions as easily as they could read a fresh edict. Divination thereby helped build the intellectual road on which philosophy and law would travel. 800 BC, the Book of Changes and the Art of Interpretation. During the Zhou era, a different path to foresight took shape around a set of hexagrams that form the Book of Changes. Why would a leader consult 6 stacked lines to choose a strategy? The hexagrams encode patterns of movement and balance, teaching readers to judge the quality of their moment rather than to chase absolute certainties. Wisdom replaces simple prediction. The method begins with a cast that yields a number and a figure, but the heart of the work is commentary. How does commentary become a compass? The text offers images like wind over water or thunder within earth, and each image invites reflection on attitudes and risks. A commander who reads about receptive earth may choose patience rather than a reckless charge. This approach respects agency. If fate were fixed, counsel would be trivial. Why then do the changes ask about conduct? Because character can tilt outcomes. The book tells its users to harmonize with the time, to avoid forcing what the season cannot bear, and to seize openings without vanity when they appear. That advice turns divination into education. Scholars refined the system until it served both princes and farmers. What makes a farmer reach for a hexagram? Weather, debt, and family obligations create crossroads where one path leads to ruin and another to relief. The Changes gives a language for these crossings, and that language helps households talk calmly through stress. The Book of Changes endures because it joined clarity with humility. It promises no glittering certainty, yet it gives structure to hard thinking in foggy hours. That combination trains leaders to be both decisive and self-aware, which is one of the rarest balances in any age. 100 BC portents and the mandate of heaven. Chinese political theory stamped legitimacy with a seal called the mandate of heaven, and portents served as its inspectors. Why would lightning and locusts decide the fate of a dynasty? The belief says that moral order and natural order echo each other. When rulers grow corrupt, the world itself groans, and signs multiply like bruises on the body of the realm. Court records from early empires list floods, eclipses, earthquakes, and strange births with anxious detail. How can a list restrain an emperor? A list forces public accounting. Ministers who present portents with careful citations are not merely superstitious. They are building a case for reform that no tyrant can ignore without losing face. Reform edicts often followed bad omens. Why link tax relief to a comet? Because a comet stuns the imagination and opens a window for policy that elites would otherwise resist. A ruler who cuts levies after a shock looks wise rather than weak, and citizens feel that justice has returned along with clear skies. Symbol and law march side by side. The mandate could also justify rebellion when decay seemed beyond repair. What happens when portents pile up and harvests fail? A new house rises with banners that claim restoration, not novelty. This language cools fear of change by promising a return to cosmic balance. The story keeps the nation's spine straight during transitions that might otherwise break it. The genius of the mandate system is its feedback loop. Nature sends warnings, officials record them, policies adjust, and the people judge the results. Prophecy here is not a fever dream. It is a constitutional mechanism that anchors power to performance in the most public way imaginable. 900 AD Japan's Onmyodo and the Governance of Time. At the imperial court in Heian-era Kyoto, specialists in yin and yang calculated auspicious days, routed processions around unlucky directions, and calmed anxieties with precise rites. Why would a cultured capital submit to the advice of diviners about street turns and wedding hours? Timekeeping is a language of order, and Onmyodo spoke that language with elegance. These experts set calendars that arranged work and festival, and they placed protective rituals on the map of the city. How can a calendar shape politics? By deciding when petitions may be heard and when building may begin, a calendar distributes momentum. Those who understand its rhythms move first and move safely, which makes their projects look blessed. Legends grew around star practitioners whose insight saved emperors from harm. What turns a technician into a hero? Success under pressure does that alchemy. When a ritual stops a haunting rumor or a plague recedes after a rite, memory crowns the efficient with myth that future generations continue to honor in literature and plays. Onmyodo also protected households far from court. Why would a merchant family hire a diviner to pick a travel day? Road safety, contract timing, and fertility hopes all press citizens to seek edges in a crowded city. The system offered small reassurances that multiplied into civic calm, and civic calm is a currency that markets treasure. Over the centuries, the practice adapted, sometimes drawing criticism, sometimes coexisting with new sciences. The durable thread is the conviction that correct timing and purity of action harmonize human life with the invisible forces that surround all cities. That conviction gave shape to a civilization that prized refinement without losing respect for unseen risk. 300 BC, India's jyotisa and the prophetic imagination of the yugas. On the subcontinent, the science of light called jyotisa measured planetary motions and read their meanings for kings and households. Why bind astronomy to advice about marriage and statecraft? A cosmos woven of law and rhythm invites translation into human terms. Charts become stories about beginnings that flourish and endings that should be avoided. Indian astrologers mapped the sky at birth and tracked planetary periods known as dasas that govern phases of life. What kind of prediction follows a schedule without turning people into puppets? The model offers windows for learning and warning that invite mindful action. A student who enters a challenging period may choose discipline over drift and emerge stronger. Royal horoscopes shaped coronations and campaigns. How could a chart decide the hour of a crown? Public ritual seeks harmony, and a chart promises alignment between the candidate, the city, and the heavens. Success that follows becomes a testimonial that amplifies the art, while failure breeds revisions that refine the practice for the next generation. Alongside personal charts, wider cycles called yugas pictured vast ages of virtue and decline. What do long ages give to ordinary people? They grant perspective that softens panic. If the world is in a late age of struggle, humility and service become realistic goals that still please heaven. Prophecy scales from the intimate to the cosmic without losing touch with daily bread. The combined vision of jyotisa and yuga theory taught South Asia to see life as layered time. Personal seasons, dynastic turns, and universal epochs intertwined in a single fabric that citizens could consult with priests and scholars. That fabric supported communities through crisis because it trained them to expect change while honoring duty. 300 AD Buddhist prophetic currents and the hope of Maitreya. From Sri Lanka to Central Asia, Buddhist communities preserved prophecies about future renewal, including the coming of Maitreya as a teacher who would appear when conditions ripen. Why would a tradition focused on liberation through insight keep a calendar of future comfort? Prophetic hope encourages perseverance in disciplines that require years of patient effort. Monasteries sometimes became centers of millenarian enthusiasm when war or famine struck. How does hope avoid turning into unrest? Wise teachers guided expectation toward ethical renewal and social relief rather than violent schemes. Feeding the hungry and copying texts became ways to prepare the ground for a better age that would welcome a universal friend. Kings listened to monks who could recite stories of world ages and righteous rulers. What does a palace gain from such counsel? A palace gains a script for mercy that also stabilizes rule. When a monarch opens granaries after hearing a sermon on compassion and the wheel of time, the act is both political and spiritual, and subjects feel seen rather than used. Pilgrims carried prophecies across mountains as they visited stupas and caves filled with images of past and future Buddhas. Why do images carry prediction? Images compress long teaching into a gaze that even illiterate travelers can understand. A figure of Maitreya seated in readiness tells farmers that kindness has a future and that their children might meet it. These currents did not promise escape from the world's cycles overnight. They promise that effort aligns with a trajectory that bends toward wisdom. In that promise, communities found the stamina to teach, to trade, and to rebuild after loss, keeping faith with a horizon that glowed just beyond the next ridge. 300 AD Mesoamerica's Maya long count and the books of Chilam Balam. In the lowlands and highlands of the Maya world, time itself was a temple built of interlocking cycles that recorded births, wars, and the fates of kings. Why set stones and raise stelae to mark day counts that stretch for thousands of years? A precise calendar anchors memory so that prophecy can rest on pattern rather than on whim. The long count served that anchor. Priests calculated auspicious days for rituals and political acts, and they warned against steps taken under hostile signs. How can a day be hostile? When cycles carry reputations born of remembered events, caution becomes a public virtue. A ruler who ignores the warning risks not only defeat, but the shame of defying mathematics that everyone can see. Centuries later, in colonial times, the books called Chilam Balam gathered Khan prophecies that linked 20-year periods to characteristic fortunes. What work do such cycles perform under pressure from conquest? They preserve identity by telling communities what to expect and how to remain faithful to inherited rhythms, even as new lords demand tribute. Misread rumors about a singular doomsday have often obscured the subtlety of Maya time. Why prefer cycles to finales? Cycles allow recovery. They assure farmers that drought ends and scribes that silence will break. Prophecy here is not a hammer. It is a loom that keeps weaving even when threads snap under strain. By treating time as a living companion, the Maya tradition gave rulers and villagers a shared tool for navigating uncertainty. The calendar taught patience, and patience is the soil where wise decisions take root and outlast the noise of panic. 1400 AD Andes and the great oracles of the coast. Along the Pacific shore at Pachacamac, pilgrims climbed to consult a shrine whose answers guided lords and shepherds alike. Why would highland empires send messengers to a coastal oracle rather than rely only on their own priests? A distant voice that does not owe loyalty to local politics can grant impartial counsel in moments when a court needs an outside light. The shrine offered responses through ritual movements and divinely inspired speech that carried authority across valleys. How does a word travel so far without losing force? Merchants, emissaries, and returned pilgrims became living roads, repeating answers exactly because memory and fear of error kept them faithful. Repetition protected the oracle's power. Andean cultures also told of world-turning events called Pachacuti, when social and cosmic orders flipped and renewal was needed. What does a culture gain from naming upheaval in advance? It gains a script for reform that dignifies necessary changes. When a community believes that a cycle demands transformation, resistance softens, and leaders can rebuild without pretending nothing has changed. In the rise of the Inca, prophecy and administration walked together as rulers wove conquered regions into a network of roads and warehouses. Why invite oracles into an imperial project? Oracles tame anxiety by giving local elites a voice that seems respected by the center. Offerings to shared shrines knit a map of loyalty more securely than force alone. When storms of conquest from overseas broke the old order, memories of oracles and cycles helped survivors interpret catastrophe without surrendering self-respect. That interpretive strength kept communities from dissolving, which is a quiet victory in the face of long shadows, and it shows how prophecy can serve endurance as much as prediction. The road to Nostradamus, Across deserts, deltas, islands, and ice fields, prophecy taught communities to treat time as a partner rather than a stranger. Each culture built its own instruments for listening to signs, and those instruments shaped choices from the field to the throne. The variety is astonishing, yet a clear pattern emerges. People everywhere sought reliable ways to reduce fear and increase wisdom, and they built rituals that made courage practical. That shared instinct still whispers to us when we look for meaning in uncertain hours. These traditions did not merely guess at tomorrow, because they also trained character for the struggle between folly and prudence. Babylonian lists made rulers cautious, Hebrew preaching made nations examine conscience, and Chinese manuals tuned courts to the seasons of reform. A practical ethic sits inside these systems like a lamp in a window. The promise of a future worth living demanded present discipline. That demand made prophecy a school rather than a carnival. Long memory gave these systems their backbone, and memory traveled in clay, parchment, bark, and song until it felt older than stone. When a ritual succeeded, it entered the archive of a people, and when it failed, teachers adjusted rather than surrendered. This capacity to adapt preserved the credibility of prophecy in good weather and bad. Communities learned to carry hope without losing their grip on facts. That balance kept destiny from hardening into fatalism or melting into fantasy. By the time a French apothecary in the 16th century AD gathered star lore, histories, and poetic riddles, he walked a road paved by centuries of experiment. He inherited Mesopotamian observation, Greek ambiguity, Jewish moral vision, Persian renewal, Chinese change theory, and Mesoamerican cycles, all flowing through Latin, vernacular chronicles, and the bustling presses of Renaissance towns. His quatrains did not spring from silence, but from a crowded library of earlier voices. The weight of that library made his verses feel both ancient and timely. Audiences today still seek forecasts, yet the deepest craving behind that search remains what it has always been, which is confidence about how to act when tomorrow looks foggy. The legacy of these pre-modern systems is a set of habits that still serve modern minds. Observe carefully, question motives, honor conscience, respect timing, and hold hope with humility. Those habits turn prediction into preparation and keep wonder alive without letting it devour judgment. Standing at the end of this survey, one last question invites a thoughtful pause. What kind of future would we deserve if our own generation became an omen for those who follow? The answer lives in how we listen to experience, how we treat the vulnerable, and how we align ambition with truth. If we do that work with steadiness, any forecast becomes friend rather than tyrant, and the long conversation about fate continues with clarity rather than fear. If you made it this far, thanks for watching, and make sure to smash both the like and hype buttons and subscribe to our channel for more ominous history videos. We greatly appreciate your support. See you in the next video.